Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. Do you want to become a talk show host? Do you have a great idea? Passionate World Talk Radio is currently looking for podcast hosts for our Internet Talk Radio station. Please email us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com with your name, email address, cell phone number, and podcast topic. In return, you will receive a 3-minute intro on air to a live audience about your podcast. Remember, just email us your name, email address, and your podcast topic, and in return, you will receive a free 3-minute intro on the air. How cool is that? Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
This show does not provide medical advice. If you're having a medical emergency, please call 911. Anything you hear here should be discussed with your primary health care provider. Hello and welcome to Everyone Dies, the radio show produced by Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal it is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I'm Marianne Matzo, and for the next 30 minutes, I am your host. Well, today we have a real treat. We have an author with us today, Bill Guggenheim, who wrote Hello from Heaven. And Hello from Heaven is not a recent book, but it is still widely popular. And what it brings to us is a conversation about after-death communication, or ADC, after-death communication. So, Bill, welcome to the show.
Well, it's my pleasure to be your guest.
Thank you. So, for the listeners who don't know, can you tell us what after-death communication is all about?
Yes, we call them after-death communication experiences. So we call them ADC experiences, or ADCs. And that's really a definition that we use, is that an ADC, or an after-death communication experience, is a spiritual experience that occurs when a person is contacted directly and spontaneously by a family member or a friend of theirs who has died. An ADC is a direct experience because no third parties, such as psychics, mediums, hypnotists, or rituals, or anything like that, are involved in any way. These are direct experiences. And an ADC is a spontaneous event because our deceased loved ones, our friends and our relatives and whatnot, always choose when, where, and how they will contact us, which means that they can occur anytime and anywhere. So while people want to have this happen, they can't make it happen. They can ask for it to happen, pray for it to happen, things like that, but they have to allow it to occur. They cannot make it occur on their own.
So did you hear any stories of a stranger coming to somebody and saying, I need you to do this, or I need you to tell somebody something? It's always a friend or family?
Perhaps because of the definition of what we were searching for, and we stated it very clearly in our flyers and things like that, is that it would be a relative or a friend. So those are the reports that we received. And so, in this case, those are the ones that we were interviewed and recorded and worked with. And so we don't have any information about people being contacted by somebody totally unknown to them or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. But you haven't in your seminars or any run into people who said, well, I didn't know this person, but here's what happened.
That virtually never came up that I recall, and I've been giving these seminars since we began our research in 1988, and we spent 7 years doing it. And we gave our first workshop 1 year later, 1989, to the Compassionate Friends at their national conference. And virtually that just hasn't come up in our workshops or any place. Having experiences with people they did not know.
Mm-hmm. I was curious about that in terms of your definition.
No, this is.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's always with a relative or a friend, someone they have known, or else they probably wouldn't be able to identify them, and that would be meaningless for our purposes.
Right. So your book is a wonderful compilation of people's experiences, both, seeing, hearing, smelling. What, personally, as a person, what did you learn from reading and hearing all of these stories?
Well, what did I learn personally? That's a huge question. But this convinces me more than near-death experiences do, because the people who have an NDE go out of their body and whatnot, and they're often close to dying, whereas the people we interviewed were all in good health. We always checked by asking them, had they been drinking any alcohol or taking any drugs other than prescribed drugs. And anybody who did, we did not interview or collect their experience. So these people were in very good health, and the stories are extremely lucid and clear and logical, and they help people transform their grief in many cases. It doesn't take away all the pain to have 1 or 100 of these experiences, but if you are grieving the death of a loved one, it mitigates, it eases the pain to some degree. And having ongoing communication really is helpful for those who have been that fortunate to have ongoing ADC experiences.
That was a question as I read your book that I wanted to ask you. I noticed that when people came back, when they had these ADC communications, that the message that I was noticing was, worry about me, I'm okay, I'm happy, don't try to bring me back,
I know what you're saying.
Don't hold me here. But isn't the issue our loss, living in a world
where there are two
where
parts of loss.
These people aren't here?
There are two parts of grief, two parts of loss. One is our concern for the person who died, and where are they? Do they still exist, first of all? How are they? Where are they? What are they doing? Things like that. And the second part of grief is our own sense of loss. There's a void in our life when someone close to us dies. That's very painful. That's what we're really grieving as well, or even more so. And so an ADC is actually rather short in time, anywhere from 15 seconds, a minute, a couple of minutes. They're not lengthy in time, but they can be very, and usually are very, very healing. And so they do help the person to answer the first questions: how is the one I love doing? And if they see them, they see that they are healed and whole, regardless of the form of the death, whether it's an automobile accident, a fire, an explosion on a battlefield, whatever the cause of death was, heart attack, stroke, things like that. And they often, if they see them, come back somewhat younger, or that kind of thing. And so they see with their own eyes that the one who left the earth is doing fine and they're okay. We don't have to grieve for them. We could still grieve for ourselves, our own loss. But the ADC helps with answer the question of our deceased loved ones and how they are.
Yeah, I read a lot of forums about grief, and what I read that people are saying, especially with the death of a child, is that they don't want to live in a world where their child is no more. They don't want to go on.
Well, the very first thing a bereaved mother often feels, now this is their feeling, this is not their doing. A bereaved mother almost always feels she wants to die too. She wants to take her own life and be, if they have 5 children still alive, but the one who just died, they feel they that the child needs them. The one who died needs them, and they need to be with a child to help that child. So it's a temporary, fortunately, a very temporary set of feelings about taking your own life and joining the one who died. And obviously, we didn't interview anybody who had done that, but it's just a phase of the grief process. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross described those 5 different steps of grief.
Actually, we're just releasing a show about the stages of grief and Kubler-Ross. And I understood from reading your book that you became friends. Would that be fair with her?
Yes, I did become friends. Well, I saw her at the Phil Donahue show in 1976, and they also had her name and address at the end, so I sent a small check to her to support her work. And in turn, she invited me to attend a 5-day workshop called a Life, Death, and Transition workshop. And I went to that a few months later, and they were the 5 most joyous days of my life, 5 most joyous consecutive days of my life. They were about life and living, not death and dying. And I won't begin to attempt to describe that in a half hour. It would take much more longer. But by the end of it, we all wanted to go off to an island together, call our family members and have them join us, and just go on living in this wonderful high that we had from sharing everything we did during those 5 days. And then I visited her at 2 of her homes subsequently, one in Virginia and another one in Arizona when she was retired. So I became friends of hers, and we exchanged letters and things like that. Yes.
Did she have thoughts about or help you in terms of your development of this after-death communication experiences?
No, at that point she was doing collecting some near-death experiences, which was a field that was already in motion. Raymond Moody had written his book in 1975 called Life After Life. And Raymond was the primary collector, but also Elizabeth collected some experiences from some of the people who attended her workshops. And she would tape record them and talk about them that way. But so our field really didn't come into being until we published Hello from Heaven in 1995. And then it came out by Bantam Books in 1996. So there was no field to talk about them. Nobody had a name for these experiences. We gave them their name, after death communications. We were ADCs. And I'd like to let you know there are 12 major types, and that's what's covered in our book of ADCs. And then we cover each of those and give 15 examples, 1 chapter to each of the types, 2 chapters to ones where they actually see their loved one. And then we go into what the messages are, what is said to them, and things like that. And then we have 6 chapters in Hello from Heaven. Why are these real? Why are these authentic communications by deceased loved ones? And therefore, we believe there's certainly evidence for life after death, and I believe personally they're proof of life after death, simply because these people were in good health when they had the experience. And we have over 100 accounts in these 6 chapters that are very reasonable and actually evidential, where that people learned things they didn't know before, and their lives were saved or protected, things of that nature. Yes.
So, just out of curiosity, why is the assumption that the messages are from heaven? Is that so that the sense that...
Why are we using the word heaven in the title, or what?
Yeah. Why is
okay.
It says hello from heaven. Well, can you talk with me a little bit about how you got there?
I think yes. Well, first of all, I suppose the universal name would be the afterlife. Then in different religions, and we live in a Jewish Christian country, or Christian Jewish country, the word heaven is the word that's most often used for the afterlife. And other religions have other names for it, whether it's nirvana or paradise or things with many different names that are used. Plus, this title came to me. I didn't think of it. I woke up one morning with the guidance to use this title, and I made up a little sticker because I did this work with my former wife, Judy Guggenheim, and I put the sticker on the computer for her to see. And I was waiting for her to comment on it, but it took most of the day before she asked me about it. But the title was given to me to use. Actually, publishers wanted to change it. They didn't like the title.
Really?
And we said no.
What did they want?
They didn't say. They just said, your book is too warm, and we want a book that's more arm's length, objective, like a scientist would write, and we don't want Hello from Heaven that seems too warm and caring and emotional, and wanted something else, more intellectual, more...
So,
something like a PhD might write, something like that.
So, what role do you think our subconscious plays in telling us the things that we need to hear?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
I said, what role do you think our subconscious plays in telling us what we need to hear?
I never thought of it in terms of our subconscious because people actually hear words like I'm okay, I'm fine, everything is okay, I'm happy, and they say the ones who come back and give the words, speak words to them, don't worry about me, don't grieve for me. They'll often say everything will be all right, meaning for you. Go on with your life. And that's the big message, go on with your life. And sometimes a woman will be told by her deceased husband to marry somebody else if that's what she wants to do. But don't stop living her life because he died, her husband died. Sometimes they'll say, please forgive somebody.
You had told me or had mentioned that there's occurrences from the end of life that are not in the book. Could you talk to me a little bit about that? Okay,
yes, we spoke about on the phone is that we have a 400-page book here, and we didn't have room for everything, and frankly, we weren't focusing on these, and so we didn't deliberately collect them. We do have a number in our files, and these are experiences that occur when somebody is dying. The first one is called bedside experiences, and again, these are not in the book, but these are very real. We have a number of them. So bedside experience is where somebody who is sitting with a person who's dying is in the room with them. Could be a relative or friend. It could be a nurse or social worker, or hospice worker, anybody is with them. And they all of a sudden they will start seeing the room is filled with other people who are not physical, but who have died themselves. And are there to escort the one who died to the light. And they've come to be with them as they make their transition. That's what we call the death, is transition from this world or this lifetime to the afterlife. And so some of these people looked at photographs, albums afterwards, and been able to pick out specific people in the family who they didn't know, but who was in the room with a dying patient before they left their body. And these are very warm experiences, very uplifting, and it's evidence that nobody dies alone. As they have deceased loved ones and others there with them to help them and assist them to leave their body. That's one category. A second one is actually at the moment of death, this sometimes occurs. We call the soul leaving the body. In this case, a person is with somebody at the very moment they leave, and they tend to leave, they always leave by the top of their head or from the middle of their chest. And it's like they see first like a vapor leaving that area, and then rises and forms into the likeness of the person who just died. And that being will often thank the person who was with them for being there with them, for maybe helping them medically or whatever. And then they'll say goodbye, and they'll sort of rise up through the ceiling or go out through the window or whatever, sort of like Superman in a way, and off they go to their new life. And then the third one is a category we call the escort to the life. This could be, you don't necessarily have to be with a person who just died. You may be in your own bed in your own home, 100 or 1,000 miles away, but you just know that your loved one has just made their transition, just died, and you join them. You leave your body, you join them, and you escort that person from here across to the other side, to their home in the light. Call it heaven if you wish, whatever name you like best.
Do you have a sense of how frequently this happens?
No, because we didn't interview people for these experiences, first of all, let me finish the last one. When they escort somebody to the light, as they near that where they're going, that heaven, they see people reaching out with their arms to the one who has died, and the escort, that person, is told, "Thank you very much for helping him or her. We love you. Thank you very much. Now you have to go back." So they're sent back to their own body. And how often they occur, I don't know. We didn't keep statistical information on any of our work. I'm not a clinical type of researcher. I'm just going for the stories that people share with us. Mm-hmm. And so there's no hard evidence of that nature, how many do, how many don't. Mm-hmm. I don't think most people have somebody who does that, but these have been reported.
Have you thought about doing some additional interviews, talking with people about these shared death experiences?
I've thought about it, but frankly, number one, it took 7 years to do this research. That was a long time, and I had to spend many, many hours. I won't go through all the different steps, but there are many steps involved. First of all, finding somebody who had an experience, calling them on the phone, hearing what it was, and taking down data and entering it into the database, and then having somebody else call them and do a taped telephone interview. All our work is based upon taped telephone interviews, which were later transcribed from audio cassette tapes to written form, and that's what we used for the book, the written forms. And so this is very time-consuming, very lengthy, very elaborate. And the last thing I wanted to do is start doing more research, plus the fact I was out giving workshops. I gave workshops all over the United States and Canada. Judy did a few in England and in Italy. So that's where we were invited to be speakers. And we did, and over a period, I gave workshops from 1989 right up now. I'm doing them on the internet via Zoom. I'll be doing 2 large conferences in June and July here on Zoom. Mm-hmm. So still doing them after. So with that busy, always being busy and doing this, didn't have time to do research as well.
Well, it's a lot easier now than it was in 1988 with all of the software programs and transcription programs and that kind of thing. So and you can really get into specific words and all of that. So the technology would make your life a lot easier if you were to look at these shared experiences.
Basically, you still have to find the people who've had the experience and are willing to be interviewed, and that's the hardest part, especially with these ones that occur as someone is making their transition, the bedside experiences, the soul leaving the body and escort to the light. I'd have to specialize just in hospices and hospice-type people. Mm-hmm. And yes, I've done
nurses, yeah.
I'm nurses. And I'd have to zero in on those who've had the experiences. They'd have to be willing. Some people aren't willing to share this material. I have to, specialize in all that. So it would take a long time. I'm not saying it wouldn't be possible. I'm just saying it would take several years to do to do this properly and have a beautiful book upon it, like Hello from Heaven is. That's my standard.
Think of how fascinating that would be to And we talked before.
And okay, two other categories you're not familiar with because we didn't discuss them. One is we had a whole chapter we actually worked on of children's ADCs, and this is where children, meaning under 18 years of age, had an experience. And we have a whole chapter of those, but we didn't have the room to include them. Plus, with the very first book, things were not open nearly as much in 1995 as they are now to hear this information. And so we didn't want to try to have too much in one book. And then there's another whole category of people whose deceased pets have come back to them. So it's an ADC with a pet. And those are very warm, very touching. And most of them involve dogs or cats, but in our case, we have one in our files with a rabbit and one with a horse. And so that's another whole book in itself, perhaps.
Well, I did an interview with a pet communicator. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I've heard of that, yes. But that's kind of like a medium in a way. We wanted to speak to the person who had the experience directly, not as a medium or a psychic. We excluded them from our work. So pet communicators are people who are able to have communications with pets. Yes, I've heard that. And I think it's beautiful work. But we were after something else, a little bit different, that's all.
Oh, right. So we had interviewed a animal communicator who lives in New York City, and what she does is she can cue in and communicate with a deceased animal, because there are people who say, I want to know, whatever. And
that's like a medium or a psychic is for human beings. That's all, and we did not use that as part of our work. All our communications are direct, without psychics and without mediums, purposely.
Right.
So you don't have to.
And, because that gives a whole different sort of, I guess, take on things.
Validation.
I had a friend who was in her 80s when I lived in New Hampshire, who, from the time she was a little girl, was able to see things and hear things that others didn't see, but not in a mental health sort of way. And apparently that was something that was right through her entire family, her mother and her grandmother. And I'd go visit her, and she would just, we'd be talking, and she'd say, "Who calls you Smiley?" I'd look at her and I'd say, "What?" And she'd say, "There's this man here in an army uniform, and he's calling you Smiley." Yeah,
well, this is a medium or a psychic who's doing that. That's what they're generally called.
Well, she never called herself that, and she also was one of these people who never, would charge people. She'd say, you want to come visit me, and whatever.
I'm not saying she did that professionally. I'm just saying she had those abilities. Yeah. That's all.
Yes.
And that's the third person. We wanted direct contacts with the actual person who had died.
And I was going to tell you, in terms of the shared death experiences, I worked many years as a hospice nurse, and I'm also a Reiki master. And for people at the end of life, if I was, like waiting for a medication to take effect or talking with families, I would do Reiki, and I put just simple, laying on of hands. And I would get this sort of like a train running through me. I would feel this energy being pulled from me, and a vibration that on other people I've never experienced, but more than once. I experienced it with somebody who was in the last stages of their dying process. Right. And I even had one woman who I had my hands on her, and she said, "You're burning me, you're burning me." And I took my hands away, and I thought, that was interesting, you know?
Yes, yes.
Like, she must have felt it too. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yes, that's why she said the energy felt like heat or fire to her.
Yeah. So there's a lot of those kinds of things that occur that are hard to explain or hard to understand, but yet I guess it's that idea of the unknown, right? That we don't know what happens after that final breath, and we want to.
Yes.
What's your thought about the similarities of these stories? You know, the white, the light, the meadows, there were a lot of similarities in the descriptions that I noticed as I was reading.
Okay. Are you speaking of our book or books about near-death experiences?
No, your book.
Okay, yes. Yeah, that's why we have about 15 experiences per chapter. We have 353, put another way. We have 353 first-hand accounts in our book, Hello from Heaven. 353. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. And we wanted the reader to read this many, so we're not just telling them this happens. We want them to know what happens from what they read themselves. It's not about us convincing them of the reality of this, but for them to read this many and feel this commonality of these experiences and the upliftment of them and things of that nature. And that was the purpose of Hello from Heaven.
But what I was asking about is that there's a lot of commonalities in terms of what people see, how they see who they perceive as God, or that they're in fields. You know, there's a lot of things that are consistent in some of the stories. Did you notice that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do you make of that? Is that because that's how it is over there? Or is that how we understand it?
That's their reality. They're reporting what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're experiencing, and that's their reality. This is brought out with near-death experiences especially. Even though each one is unique and different from all the others, there are a great many commonalities between them. They go toward the light. They may see their own body on an operating table or in an accident or whatever as they leave it. They go towards the light. It doesn't blind their eyes, no matter how bright it is. And they see deceased loved ones, one or more, or a spiritual being, and may have a review of their own lifetime, their entire life. It passes by in I won't even say seconds. There is no time, but they see everything from their entire life in some cases, or a lot of different things, various parts of it in other cases. They see deceased relatives or friends. They see buildings. They see cities. They see flowers. They see trees, green grass. What's interesting, they don't see shadows. That's something I learned. Everything gives off its own light. Everything is radiant light. Nothing is decaying. They see bushes and trees and all these beautiful things, but nothing is dying ever. It's all at peak. And these are some of the things of near-death experiences. There's a great deal more as well.
Yeah, one of the stories that I found really fascinating was the one about the woman who had a daughter that she miscarried, and then a son. I don't remember if he was stillborn, but years later, she had this ADC where both children came back to her.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't. I don't remember that one.
Yeah. Well, and she and the girl was older than the boy, which was, I guess, the case, and she was able to see what they looked like and the characteristics of, I think the daughter looked like her or whatever, the son looked like the husband.
Okay.
But there was the aging of a baby, like there were stories in there where people went to their younger self. But I think that was the only
if they're
one I read.
if they're elderly, they go backwards in age to their prime, or whatever they regard as their prime. And if they're infants or children, they tend to move forward to their prime over time. Not instantly, but over time. And this is true for people who have a near-death experience. They see that.
Huh.
And because this is you have to see the body as just a temporary housing. And it's I call it our earth suit. And all that death is we step outside it, we release, we no longer use our earth suit, because that's what dies. And then we ourselves, each of us is a spirit or a soul or a being of light right here, right now. And we just continue in that natural reality of ours.
Well, Bill, I'm going to thank you so much for talking with me and for sharing your insights. And to our listeners, thank them for spending time with us during this show, Everyone Dies. You can read our blogs and listen to our other podcasts at everyonedies.org. That's EBERY, the number 1 dies.org. Thank you to our producer, Jeannie White, and our CEO, Lillian Caldwell. We produce a new show every Wednesday to answer questions related to life-threatening illness, dying, and death. Remember, you can listen to Passionate World Talk Radio on Spreaker and our shows wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic that you'd like to discuss on our show, please email me, Marianne at everyonedies.org. That is MARIANNE at everyonedies.org, EBERY, the number 1 dies.org. I hope that you live your best life every day. And remember, every day is a gift. Thank you for listening.
Do you want to become a talk show host? Do you have a great idea? Passionate World Talk Radio is currently looking for podcast hosts for our Internet Talk radio station. Please email us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com with your name, email address, cell phone number, and podcast topic. In return, you will receive a 3-minute intro on air to a live audience about your podcast. Remember, just email us your name, email address, and your podcast topic, and in return, you will receive a free 3-minute intro on the air. How cool is that? Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.